Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Enrique Levine, co-founder and VP of Product at Zintro. Zintro is a global platform that makes it really easy for companies to start conversations with highly specialized consultants and other professionals about potential consulting projects, phone consults, or even employment opportunities. Specialization spans all industry sectors, technical disciplines, job functions, and geographies. Zintro is completely free, anonymous, and without obligation. Today's webinar, Starting to Export from the USA, will be presented by Kenneth D. Weiss, President at Plans and Solutions Incorporated. It is with great pleasure I introduce Zintro expert Kenneth D. Weiss. Kenneth has both bachelor's and master's degrees in marketing. He's a foreign trade consultant with experience in importing, exporting, and helping individuals and companies to be successful in those businesses. He conducts seminars on the subject and has written 4 books, including Building an Import-Export Business, now in its 4th edition, from John Wiley Sons Incorporated. He has traveled widely, has lived in 5 countries outside the US, can speak 3 languages, and is studying 3 more. If you would like to ask Kenneth any specific questions throughout the webinar, feel free to use the questions section of your GoToWebinar control panel. In the top right corner of your screen, you'll see a little orange arrow. Click on that, and then you'll see the questions section. Feel free to ask any question throughout the webinar. Kenneth will be responding to questions after the presentation, so stick around. It will also be providing Kenneth's contact information at the end of this webinar for follow-ups, questions, and even consultations. So stay tuned. Without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our presenter, Kenneth D. Weiss.
Thank you, Enrique, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be presenting for Zintro this webinar on starting to export from the USA. I'm going to try to tell you in a little under an hour everything I can about how to export. Obviously, there's a huge amount of information. I can't cover it all, but I'll try to tell you what kinds of information you need and where to get it. And this webinar is intended for individuals who would like to export as well as managers of small companies. It's a little difficult to include both groups in the same webinar, but that's what we're going to attempt to do. And I'll be presenting information and examples as much as I can. No theory, because most of us don't have time to waste. We're busy people, and there's a whole lot of information available on the internet, and I do not want to repeat much of what you can easily find by yourselves. I do have one little warning, as you can see from the picture on the right. There are companies and individuals with offers on the internet for $100 or $200 or $300. They will make you an instant exporter. And for a few people that works. For most of us, it's sort of like pouring money down a hole, and I don't recommend it. This is a business like any other business. It takes some time and some effort, and it's pretty hard to shortcut the process and make it as easy as some people like to make you think it is. All right, a couple of examples. First, as an individual exporter, one lady I know, and I'll tell you more about her in a minute, is exporting cosmetics to Peru on a very small scale, not through a company, but as herself. The other example is an established company in Baltimore, Columbia Technologies, which started up, was selling well in the domestic market, and then moved into exporting. And just for my information, I would like to do a quick poll right now of the listeners, and I'd like to know whether you see yourself as the individual startup or as an established company.
Okay, so thank you very much, Ken. Let me read that out loud for everyone. So will you export as a startup or an established company? And the options are clearly startup and company. We're going to give a few seconds to get responses from most of our audience. I think we can close the poll. Most of our audience has responded, and basically 68% of our audience said startup and 32% said company.
Okay.
Back to you, Ken.
Thank you. So indeed, we're on the right track addressing both groups, both of which are important groups. The lady I mentioned who's doing working with cosmetics to Peru was in a course that I teach at Montgomery College. I teach a short course on exporting and importing twice a year at Montgomery College in Rockville, Maryland. She has not registered a business. She does her purchasing in mass market stores where she can get the best prices, carries the merchandise to Peru herself when she travels, takes fairly small quantities, and if customs asks her, she says they're gifts or they are samples. And I put a note here in parentheses that customs, if they wanted to, could require her to mutilate the samples so they cannot be sold, and so far she's been lucky that hasn't happened. Normally, she does not pay any customs duties or value-added tax or other import charges, and she sells informally to friends and family members. So that's her model as a startup individual. She can have fun. She can get started. She can't make a whole lot of money unless she formalizes and goes to a larger scale. Now, the other example is Columbia Technologies in Baltimore. They describe themselves, and you can read the first 3 lines if you want to. That's the way they describe their business. I summarized and said they study soil and improve it or make it better. I think that's a much clearer description of what they do. They started 17 or 18 years ago, sold in the U.S., went to Canada, decided to export, and picked Mexico as a target country. And then they went on a U.S. government trade mission to Mexico. These are missions sponsored by the U.S. Department of Commerce. They can be very, very helpful. Then they added Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, other countries. And now, not too many years after they started exporting, they've worked on 100 sites studying soil and improving it, many of which are outside the U.S., and they've gotten awards for success in exporting. So this, very briefly, is 2 models, the individual and the established company getting into the export business. In general, it all starts with 3 things, a business model and a market and a product. And all the rest depends on those. If you're the individual, you're not in business yet, you need to pick a model and identify a market and find a product. Or some people would say, identify a product and find a market. The difference is whether you're a marketing-oriented person or a production-oriented person, and there are lots of arguments about that. But if you are in business, you already have a product, so you're ready to pick a market and go for it. And I have this summary explained on the next 4 slides, starting with, you're not in business, you need to pick a business model. Agent, broker, merchant. Once I was in the paper products business. I was an agent for companies that wanted to export paper products. I would try to find buyers for them, try to make sales for them, and then they would ship and collect and pay me a commission. I was their agent. At one point, I ran into a company in Haiti that wanted paper rolls for adding machines and calculators. Believe it or not, once upon a time, people used adding machines and calculators, and they needed rolls of paper. The companies for which I was an agent did not have paper rolls, so I found another company that did have, and I brokered a shipment. I made a deal between 2 companies with which I was not formally related. I did not handle the merchandise. I did not handle the payment. I received a commission when the transaction was completed. So that time I worked as a broker. If I had bought the paper myself and shipped it, then I would have been working as a merchant, like any business that buys and sells. And so the 3 basic models are agent, broker, and merchant. Now, this question, I guess, pertains mainly to the 60-some% of you who are not actually in business, but here's my second poll question. Getting into the export business, how do you see yourself? As an agent or a broker or a merchant?
Thanks, Ken. We'll give a couple of minutes for people to respond. What model do you think you will follow, agent, broker, or merchant? Let's give a few more seconds. Please answer by clicking on the option on your screen, guys. Okay. I think we can close the poll. Most of our audience has replied. And the answer is basically 55% merchant, 26% broker, and 19% agent.
All right, thank you. This audience replies fast. They're good. I should have, to make the question more fair, I should have explained more clearly that to be a merchant takes more money and more risk, but maybe the 55% of our people are prepared to do that. I certainly hope so. If you're not in business, however you work, agent, broker, or merchant, you need to identify your market. In general, pick one where you have advantages, like the language, you know the language, and you have contacts. Preferably one where people favor American products. There are, believe it or not, countries in the world where the U.S. is not liked by everybody, sometimes with good reason, sometimes with not such good reason. And you need a market to which you can do the shipping reasonably quickly and at a reasonable cost, and where the regulations do not make it too hard for the merchandise you ship to be entered, and preferably where there's some kind of trade agreement. And the U.S. does have trade agreements with many, many countries, but there are many others with which we don't have. And the example I've put up here is and I'm not sure what people will see in the picture I've got on the right. That would be an interesting poll question too. But the example is when trade with Cuba is more legal, it's already somewhat legal, but when it's more legal, many Cuban Americans will be trading. They will jump into the business because they have the language and probably the contacts. Cuba, from what we hear, is hungry for American products. Shipping is going to be very quick and very easy. I don't think there's going to be a trade agreement very soon, but I will not be surprised if someday Cuba becomes a part of the trading group, which we call DR-CAFTA, Dominican Republic and Central America. So, not in business yet, identify a market in which you have advantages. With the market in hand, you need to figure out what product you will export. Any product has characteristics. You try to sell the product to buyers. They are professionals. They know it. They will ask all sorts of questions. And if you can't answer them, if you can't describe the size, the shape, the variety, the color, the texture, the ingredients, the raw materials, and all details about the product, you will lose credibility. So it's much better to pick a product that you already know a lot about. If you're in the U.S., you have friends and family members overseas. They might tell you what they're looking for, or they might hear of products that are in demand. You can always do a statistical analysis. You can get, suppose you want to export to Argentina or to countries in the southern cone of Latin America. You can get the statistics that say what they are importing, how much of it is from the United States, and of which products the imports are increasing. Because if they're increasing, that means the new markets are opening up. It's going to be easier to sell. You can, if you want to, do market research or have someone do it for you, or in some cases buy existing market studies, and I'll talk about that later on. And then I have to mention what we call buyer-seller bulletin boards. If you look on the internet, go to Google or whatever your search engine is and type import-export bulletin boards or buyer-seller bulletin boards, and you'll get many, many websites that advertise products to buyers and to sellers. And the biggest of these is one called Alibaba, which is located in China. It's a huge import-export bulletin board, and you can get many ideas about products for which people are looking or which people want to buy or sell. In picking a product, consider some factors like supply. Can you get it? Does the U.S. have enough? Is it available to you, or is it made only by a few companies and they already have their export plans made? Competitiveness, is the U.S. price or the U.S. cost competitive with the cost of the same product from other countries? And again, shipping, can you ship the product all right, and the regulations. Some products are much easier to export from here and import to other countries than others, and my example is apples, not bananas. The U.S. has plenty of apples at most times of the year, not all times. We are competitive. The product ships fairly well. It does not spoil easily, and most countries do not have excessively difficult regulations with regard to apples. So consider your product carefully before you spend much time and money trying to get it into a market. Now, if you're in business, hopefully you've got inquiries that come to you from other countries. Maybe orders, maybe you've already made some shipments, and countries you've already sold to indicate that those might be good market countries. Again, you can do analysis of statistics and certainly market research. And the example here is a company in Missoula, Montana called the Milky Way, and you can see it's W-H-E-Y. Maybe you can guess why it's W-H-E-Y. I'll tell you in a minute. They export under the name of TMW, and when they're looking at markets and trying to decide where to sell their products or to try to sell their products, they have a variety of concerns. I talked to their export manager yesterday, but he said the main one is probably what is the state of the dairy industry in the country that they're looking at, because they sell whey and many other dairy products. So they need to know in a market country how advanced is the dairy industry, what products it has available from local sources, and what is still needed. And that helps them determine whether the country they're looking at is possibly a good one to try to export to. So looking at a foreign market, your inquiries, statistics, market research are certainly three good ways to go about it. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about marketing. You've got your business model, you've got your product, you've got your market country. A country is a vague entity. No one sells to Argentina, really. You sell to market segments in Argentina or specific customers. So here we talk about segmenting a market and deciding which segment or segments, or in some cases niches, you're going to try to sell to. And there are many ways to segment. We really can't go into that here, geographically, psychographically, etc. The next big area of concern is your product okay as it is, or do you have to modify it in some way to meet the regulations and or the buyer's preferences in the market country? And there are many products that have to be modified in some way before they can be sold in a foreign market. And I'll get to my example below in just a minute. And then once you have your target market, you're going to sell to people in Rio de Janeiro, middle income, European descendants, however you define your target market. You have your product modified for the market. Then you need to determine what kind of distribution channel you need to get the product to the target market. And my example here is lamps. You decide you want to export lamps, lighting, bulbs to the UK. You determine by looking at the UK import statistics, for example, that they have 28 different types of lamps that they recognize in their import-export business. Your lamps are middle quality. The UK in general is looking for elegance, simplicity of design, what they are now calling the feminine design, rounded corners, softer. You determine that from research. You can do your own study to get more information or have someone do it for you, or I said before, you can try to buy a research study, and the information I have here is just from a company called MTW Research Trade Sources, and what it tells you is how are lamps distributed. 14% of the lamps sold in the UK, for example, are distributed by builders and plumbers. And then you go on down to the end, 14%, another 14% by department stores in the high street area and from grocery retailers. Just a tiny example of the kinds of information you can get that helps you develop a distribution channel to get your modified product to your target market. And of course, there's a whole lot more we could say about marketing. It's a whole field in itself, but this is at least an introduction to it. Another aspect of marketing, and those of you who've studied marketing, you know the 4 Ps: product, price, place, promotion. Another aspect of it is pricing. It's pretty much suicidal, I'll say that again, pretty much suicidal for a small company to try to go into a foreign market with a low price. Why? Because any company that's already established and has customers can cut its price as much as it wants to drive you out of business. It's also pretty much suicidal to try to go in with a high price. Why? Because no one knows you yet. Your brand is not established, and people will simply not pay more for something that they don't know, for a product and a brand that they don't know and respect. So a new exporter just about has to go in with a mid-range price, maybe find a gap in the prices of competitors, and try to fit your product in the gap. In sum, it's important to work out your pricing strategy before you actually try to go into a market. And then this big item promotion. I don't have a poll, but I would guess that 50 or 60% of the people online now are thinking that all they have to do is find a distributor in a foreign country, ship the product, and the product will sell and keep on selling. But it doesn't necessarily work that way. Sometimes you ship a product, it gets in the stores, and nobody buys it. And then the result is you never make another shipment. You make one and that's it. So if you're in the export business, you have to think about, or you should think about, what you can do to help to promote sales. Help your importer or help your distributor or help your agent overseas to promote sales so that your product will stay in the market and you can keep on shipping and keep on making money. And I picked an interesting example here, Nigeria. We all get lots of, how shall we say, interesting emails from Nigeria. And some people might tend to write off that country. It's huge. It's got a lot of money. It's highly populated. The U.S. sells many, many millions of dollars worth of merchandise to Nigeria. Yes, the big items are aircraft and tanks. It's kind of hard for most of us to get into that business, but also chicken parts and chicken cuts and machine parts and many other kinds of merchandise can be sold to Nigeria. Now, how to promote the sales? Studies will tell you that in general, and this is not the same for every country, but in general for Nigeria, what works is anything that looks like, any promotion that looks like it's putting money in people's pockets or saving them money. For example, cell phone companies offer incentives like free calls at night when the cellular systems, the cellular networks are not so busy. Free calls actually save money, so that is the kind of incentive that people in Nigeria respond to. So whichever country you're selling to, whichever product, think in terms of the most effective ways and actually the most cost-effective ways of helping your marketing partners in that country to increase sales so you and they can both make more money. Okay, that's quite a bit said in a short time, so let's go on to difficult topic, logistics. This is the part of international trade that we all worry about, and it can get a little bit complicated, but we'll try to break it down and simplify it as much as we can. One of the first aspects of logistics is packing. Import and export shipments sometimes go through a lot, depending greatly on where they're going and how they're being transported. If you're sending goods break bulk, that means individual boxes, individual packages. Right? If you're sending goods break bulk, there is a special lot of handling, and anytime a package is handled, there's a chance that it will be thrown or dropped or get wet or otherwise damaged. So if you're not unitizing or palletizing, I could explain these terms if we need to in the question and answer session. If you're not unitizing or palletizing, or better yet, containerizing your merchandise, then you're shipping break bulk, and you need to pack to prevent damage as much as you possibly can. Likewise, if you're shipping by land or by sea, you need to pack very well. By air, not so, because air handlers tend to be a little bit more gentle. Aircraft in general don't suffer the same turbulence that ocean craft suffers. So pay special attention to packing. Even if you're working, let's say as an agent or a broker, you make a deal with some U.S. manufacturer to ship the goods. You never see the goods. If that manufacturer does not pack well enough, you will end up getting hurt somehow. So you need to pay attention to how the goods are being packed, no matter who does it. Okay, next point in logistics that I've got here is shipping. Just about anywhere in the world you have an option of shipping by air or by sea, and for Mexico and a little bit Central America and of course Canada, from the US you can always go by land. When you look at the options and look at the shipping rates, what will you find? You will almost always find that air is more expensive. What you don't see easily is that in shipping by air, almost everything except the actual freight is cheaper, right? You don't have to pack as well, so that's cheaper. Domestic transportation to the airport may be cheaper than to the seaport. If you use a freight forwarder, and I'll talk about those in a minute, if you use a freight forwarder to send your cargo for you, he might charge less. Insurance might be less. And in general, every cost item except the actual freight can be cheaper by air. So you don't want to just automatically reject air freight. You want to do a side-by-side comparison of air and sea, taking into account all the aspects of moving your cargo from the point of origin to the destination, and you can end up saving money that way. Next point is marine insurance. It's sort of, I guess the term marine insurance came long ago before there was any air shipment, and we still use it sometimes, even if the cargo goes by air. Now, the term CIF, you've probably heard. CIF means, well, the C is the cost of the merchandise itself, and the I is the cost of insurance, of your insurance policy, and the F is the cost of the freight, the cost of sending it. So when you add those three together, the merchandise plus the insurance plus the freight, the total is called CIF. When you go to buy an insurance policy, to cover your shipment in case it's lost or damaged, you do a rough calculation of the CIF amount and you add 10% to it. It's just a convention. And if you're thinking about what the 10% is for, maybe some of you have an idea already. If merchandise is shipped and it doesn't arrive, or it arrives in damaged condition, somebody loses the cost of the goods and the cost of the insurance and the cost of the freight and time and trouble and profit. And you get a measly little 10% to cover the lost time and trouble and profit. So when you buy insurance, think in terms of CIF plus 10%. Almost all foreign or international shipments are covered by insurance. There are some cases where it isn't. For example, with some fresh produce shipments, the produce itself is considered so perishable that the cost of the insurance is so high that people just don't buy it. But in most cases, you use it. Then in your logistics, your foreign freight forwarder is your friend. There's a little repetition of the letter F there. The F word is your good word in this case. Your friend can do many things for you. Your foreign freight forwarder, which you would use if it's a significant shipment, right? You don't need it if it's going by air, and if you're using air freight, and if it's a small amount, you don't need one. But if it's a significant shipment, your foreign freight forwarder can reserve space for you on the plane or the ship, receive your merchandise, make sure it gets loaded on the ship, help with documentation, buy insurance for you, and in other ways do a lot to help make sure that the merchandise that you're sending get to the destination and get there on time. And freight forwarders, they're in every major city probably. They're certainly in every major port and airport. You can find them easily. The best way is probably to go to any port, like go to Port of Baltimore, which is near me, and then on their internet site, you find port services, and under port services, you'll probably find a list of freight forwarders. or if that doesn't work, you can just go to the yellow pages. But the foreign freight forwarder is definitely your friend when you're talking about the logistics of international shipping. Moving on, logistics. I'm sure some of you there have heard of Incoterms. We'll get to those in a minute. Exporting is very fine. It can be fun, but only if you get paid for it. So we need to pay a little attention to how to get paid. Then there is always documentation. It used to be said that trade moves on paper. There are 100 and some documents that can be involved in a single shipment. Luckily, you might see only 3 or 4 of them, but we'll take a look at documentation. And then I have a little example here of shipping to China via UPS, and I don't want to sound like I'm making a commercial for UPS. I don't think I have stock in them, but you'll see in a minute that they can help quite a bit if you're a small-scale exporter. FedEx and DHL can too, and some others, but UPS I think is a little bit more friendly. Let's look at the Incoterms. Gads, that looks alarming. Incoterms, it means international commercial terms. They are developed by the International Chamber of Commerce in Geneva and revised every 10 years. So we are now using Incoterms 2010, and there are 11 of them. These Incoterms in general say what the exporter has to do, that is what his responsibilities are, and what the importer has to do, what his responsibility or what her responsibility is. I want to use his and her kind of equally. Many, many years ago, when trade started, the exporter and the importer didn't know each other. There were no telephones. There was no air travel. They could not easily get in contact with each other. The exporter didn't want to ship until he knew he could get paid. The importer didn't want to pay until he knew he'd get the merchandise. People got tired of working out all the details and writing down essentially a contract every time they were going to do an export shipment or buy something from overseas. And so these Incoterms were developed. Now, the ones you've probably heard of, well, let me say the first 7 of them that are called general transport are for any means of transportation, whereas the last 4 are only for transportation by water. And the ones you've probably heard of are in that the group in the last 4, FAS and FOB and CIF. Now, looking back up at the top, Ex Works means that you, the exporter, you have to dump your goods out the door of your factory, and that's it. From that point, the importer has to do everything and has to take total responsibility. You lay the goods outside the door. If they disappear, it's pretty much the importer's responsibility. Then on the opposite extreme, delivered, duty paid, that means you agree to be responsible for getting the merchandise across the ocean into the foreign country through customs, delivered to the warehouse of the importer. And as you can see, or as you can imagine, most exporters would like to be toward the beginning of this list, and most importers would like to be toward the end of the list. But what's best for one isn't necessarily best for the other. So there's a little bit of negotiation that takes place. And then looking down to the last 4, the sea and water transport, this is mainly for big shipments. It's almost entirely full container loads. If you're the exporter with FAS, you put the goods free alongside the ship in the port of Newark, for example. And it's free, meaning you've covered all the costs until that point. The goods are on the dock, and from then on, the importer takes charge. But the exact definitions of who does what, especially with regard to buying insurance, don't always follow exactly the way you think they would. So however you're shipping, you need to make sure you know which of these terms you're using and what the definition is. And you can get brief definitions of each term on the internet. If you want to, you can buy a complete book on Incoterms from the International Chamber of Commerce which has an office in New York. So be sure you know which term you're using and what your obligations are under that term. Okay, so much for Incoterms. Poll question. Other than FOB and CIF, have you heard of these terms before? Yes, no, or maybe a little bit.
Okay. Thanks, Ken. We'll give. Wow, our audience is really responsive. I'm glad this is working out for you guys. That's the whole idea. Let's give a couple of seconds. I think we can move on with closing the poll. That was amazingly fast. Thank you, everyone, for participating. So basically, the results are 52% say yes, 20% say no, and 28% say a little.
Thank you. That was fast, and yes, this audience is they've learned a little bit about exporting before this webinar. I'm glad to hear it.
Right.
That lets us move on to this little question of how to get paid. Okay, how to get paid. Some easy ways are to get a check on a U.S. bank. Some foreign buyers can do that for you. Sometimes you can charge a credit card or use PayPal. Unfortunately, there are many countries in which these options are not available. The government does not allow people to send money by PayPal, for example. The next step up is the cash transfer systems like Western Union, and there are several others. Western Union, I'm not sure how many years ago, maybe 5 years ago, it would cost you, as we say in English, it would cost you an arm and a leg to send money or receive money by Western Union, but then the competition got tough and the prices went down. So now that's a very feasible way to get money, except again, some countries do not allow their importers or their business people to use Western Union. And sort of the next step up is a bank transfer. Your customer goes to his bank and transfers money to you. It might cost him, depending on the bank and sometimes on the amount, it might cost him $25 or $30, and it might cost you $25 or $30. But you'll get your money, and usually it comes in 2 or 3 days. So this is all assuming that you work out a deal whereby your importer will pay you either before the shipment or after he gets the merchandise, or half and half, or in some other way, so that all you need to do is, all the importer needs to do is simply transfer the money. Okay. This getting a little bit more sophisticated now, and I call this when you get paid. What you would like, certainly, is cash in advance, money in hand before you ship. That's kind of hard to get, and it's negotiated, and sometimes you work, like I mentioned before, half and half, 50% down and 50% on delivery, for example. Now, I said before that in the early days of trading, banks got involved. Buyers and sellers didn't know each other. Banks got involved in assuring the shipper that he would get the money and ensuring the buyer that she would get the merchandise. And there are 2 basic devices for this. One is a bank draft, which we call a sight draft or a time draft. Basically, you, the exporter, ship through your bank. You initiate a document. You prepare a draft, open a draft. The buyer can see it, right, and either pay it or sign something that says he will pay it. When he sees it, it's on site. If he gets time to pay, then it becomes a time draft. It can be used in combination with shipping documents to protect you so that the buyer cannot get the merchandise until he sees the draft and either pays it or signs saying that he will pay it at a specified time or date in the future. Okay, so it's a little bit of a banking document, but it's initiated by the exporter. It's not too expensive. It can be used to give you some protection against not being paid. And then moving up, we get to the big daddy, which is the letter of credit. This one is initiated by the importer. The importer goes to a bank, usually his or her own bank. If she has credit, if she's credit worthy, the bank, for the amount needed, the bank will write a letter. Essentially, it's a letter to you, the exporter. We, the bank, agree to pay you, the exporter, X amount, right, at site or after time, if you do what this letter says you must do. And the letter will say what you have to ship and where you have to ship it and by when you have to ship it. And as long as you comply with all the terms and the LC was opened, is a legitimate LC, not counterfeit, opened by a legitimate bank, not fraudulent, you will get paid. Okay? And in, I don't know what percent, maybe 99.999% of the cases, LCs work the way they're supposed to, and the exporter gets his money. Okay, so I've gone from cash in advance through the banking system to open account, which means you simply ship and you send a bill, right? Or, and I say worse here, you simply ship, and when the importer sells the merchandise, she deducts her costs and her commission and remits the rest to you. That's consignment, right? Open account for you, the exporter, is certainly risky. However, this is by far the most used payment mechanism in international trade. Most trade is between companies that know each other and trust each other, and they ship, the seller ships and the buyer pays. That's open account. When the buyer pays depends on the terms that are negotiated. How the buyer pays, usually a bank transfer. Okay, the grand summary of this is, however you do your exporting, pay careful attention to how you're going to get paid, because if you don't, it is not, to understate this, not going to be a very good business venture for you. Right. Now, I see I'm a little bit behind schedule here. I apologize, so I'll have to go kind of fast on this. Export documentation. You have to supply a commercial invoice, and you pretty much have to supply a packing list. It says what you're sending and what's in each, how many boxes. Boxes 5 through 10, or boxes 1 through 5 contain spark plugs, and boxes 6 through 10 contain carburetors, and so on. For example, if box 9 disappears, you can see what was in it. Or if customs someplace wants to look at the spark plugs, he can see which box the spark plugs are in. In the commercial invoice, you can find samples on the internet to show you all the information that has to go on the invoice, but you need that. However you will ship, you will get a bill. It's not an invoice. It's a document. By air, it's an air bill, airway bill. By ocean, it's an ocean bill of lading, and so on. It's essentially a contract between you and the carrier of the merchandise that specifies the terms and the conditions under which the merchandise is being carried. In some cases, this bill can actually serve as a document of title. Whoever has that bill endorsed to him can receive the merchandise. And so it's a way of restricting, in a way of keeping the merchandise out of the hands of an importer until he or she actually pays for it. There are certain kinds of protection. When you export, if the value is over $2,500, or if it needs an export license, I'll get to that, you need to file electronic export information, and that's done by the exporter or the freight forwarder, and it has to be done by the internet. Depending on the country, or depending on the product and the country, you might need an export license, and you might need a destination control statement that says where the goods are going to end up. And in some cases, you might need a certificate of origin that says where the goods were made, or other documents. There are a whole lot of other documents that some countries require. And my Chinese example here, and this is where I put UPS. If you're shipping to China, they have a China guide on the internet, and they can help you in all sorts of ways to make the shipment, and they can sort of guide you through the process. And I'm gonna move on. Regulations. The U.S. does control exports. Foreign countries control imports. There are tariff barriers and there are non-tariff barriers. And then I've used Brazil as an example, and I've got 4 slides with information about that. The U.S. mainly restricts high-tech items and anything that could be used as weaponry to certain countries. So if you're going to export anything that might be sensitive, you need to look on the commodity control list. If your product is controlled, you will get an export control classification number, and that will tell you to which destinations and sometimes to which specific companies or people, those consignees of the merchandise, you cannot ship, or to which ones you can ship with an export license. If you need an export license, in most cases, you need to apply through the U.S. Department of Commerce. Sometimes it's also the Department of Defense or other places, but it's mostly the Commerce Department. So be careful about this. Do not try to ship something without making sure that it does not need to have a license. And then the importing country, there are all sorts of strange restrictions. My little example, you can't ship chewing gum to Singapore. Why? People in Singapore can't chew gum. It's dirty, you know. They're a clean country. They don't like it. And other countries can have little restrictions. So be careful about that. How to find out about export regulations here and import regulations there. You can get information from officers of the U.S. Commercial Service, or from foreign consulates in the U.S., or from your importer overseas, or from trade service companies, companies that serve you, such as UPS and foreign freight forwarders. Technically, every product has an import duty, but the import duties very often are zero, especially if there's a free trade agreement. And looking at my example of the UK lamps, remember there are 28 kinds of lamps recognized by customs in the UK, but the duties on most of them for products from the US are zero. But countries also restrict imports of merchandise that might carry insect pests, that might be harmful to the health of people or animals, that might injure people. That's consumer protection. They try to protect their domestic industries against too much competition, or I say fair prices, against too cheap competition. And there are international regulations that prohibit international trade in species that are in danger of extinction, and archaeological relics, etc. So I've sort of adapted a customs phrase here. Before you ship something, know the regulations, or at least, this is a little bit sarcastic, at least be sure that you'll get paid, even if the importation, even if the product does not enter the foreign country. And in my example, Brazil, a whole lot of products need import licenses. To be an importer is kind of difficult. So make sure your importer, if you sell to that country, is licensed and registered, or make sure that you're going to get paid no matter what happens when the product gets there. Now, you will need more help, and I've put here U.S. Department of Commerce, U.S. Department of Agriculture, Small Business Administration, there are others, and a wonderful website, export.gov. You might also get help from state and county and city. Some of them have their own export promotion offices. In fact, I think every state in the country has one now. Whatever kind of merchandise you're dealing with, subscribe to the magazines, the trade publications, and join the trade associations. They can help. And then any export service company, like the freight forwarders, the shippers, the banks, anybody who stands to make money from you if you're successful, will give you some help. Not a whole lot unless you give them some business, but some help. And then I put in two wonderful websites there, and you can see right away what they help you with. These are both private companies. They charge you, but they both give you a few free samples. You can get freight quotes, or you can calculate duties for free a few times before they start charging you. And then finally, there are a whole lot of good books on importing and exporting, and I've mentioned just two of mine, Building an Import-Export Business, 4th edition, and the newer one, Conquiste el Mercado Americano, which is only in Spanish, and you can get them both on Amazon.com. Export business, it is good business. I certainly look forward to hearing from some of you, and Right now we have about 10 minutes for questions. I'm sure there will be some.
Great. Thank you very much, Ken. Yes, we have some time for questions. So, guys, if you haven't written your questions, feel free to use the questions section of your GoToWebinar platform. Again, orange arrow, and then write your question and questions. We're going to be providing the recording of this presentation also in the following weeks, so stay tuned, check your email. Let's jump to a couple of questions, Kenneth. So we have a question from Ed, who's asking, what about marketing, selling of a service rather than a product? And what may be the difference with a service?
One of the examples I had right in the beginning, that company in Baltimore is selling a service. The marketing process isn't that much different. Where it's really different, I think, is that instead of shipping something, you're normally shipping people. As you send, in the case of that company, if they do an analysis of soil samples and then they do soil remediation, they're selling the service either through a broker or through an agent or through essentially their own salesperson in a foreign country. But then when they get to perform it, they usually send people overseas physically and also hire other people overseas, so that instead of actually sending goods on a ship or plane, they're sending people to perform the service. I'm sure there are other differences, but that stands out to me as the most important one.
Okay, thank you very much, Kenneth. We have, oh, interesting. We have the same question from Felix, so I'm going to skip that one. We have another question by Amy. The question is, my company makes consumer electronic cameras. Our products are certified in the US, like FCC certification, etc., but not in many European and Asian countries. Can we still ship our products to these countries? We clearly specify to international buyers that the product is not certified in their country and that is sold as per product US policy.
If well, shipping, has two sides: the U.S. export and the foreign import. You certainly should check to see if you need an export license from the U.S. I don't think so if they're fairly simple cameras, but if they're extremely complex, extremely high tech, you might. The foreign countries, you also need to check their regulations, and my guess is that there would not be regulations against buying them in a foreign country, but the buyers would have their standards, and they should not buy your cameras unless their customers can use them. The problem we had for, I guess, not too many years ago was with the two VHS systems, that some countries had their own VH system, and then they imported the other system, and some of their consumers could not use the second system because they were not compatible. It's certainly in your interest to make sure that the final customers can use your system, and so I would suggest not shipping it unless you're sure it can get out of the U.S. and into the foreign country, and consumers can actually use it without any difficulty.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. We have another question by Alan. The question is, if I would like to export health food products to China, what shipping method would you recommend?
I'm not sure I heard the word. Was it health food products?
Yes, health food products to China.
Health food products, if they're perishable, China is, of course, a long way, and you'd go by air. Most health food products are probably not perishable. The Chinese market is so big that you probably wouldn't get buyers that need less than a container load. And for a container load, shipping by sea is almost always the cheapest way. The shipping to China, you probably know that we import much more from China than we export to China, and therefore containers go from the U.S. to China. Some go empty, and therefore the shipping charge from the U.S. to China is reasonably inexpensive. The containers we're talking about, if it's food, if it's heavy food, you would probably use a 20-foot container, which in general is 8 or 8.5 feet wide, in general it's 8 feet wide and 8 or 8.5 feet high and about 20 feet long. So it holds a whole lot of merchandise. If you're selling chips or something like that with a lot of air in the package, it's fairly light, you would use probably a 40 or even a 45-foot container, which is, again, is 8 feet wide and 8.5 feet high and 40 or 45 feet long and holds a huge amount of merchandise. So I guess the answer is in most cases it would go by sea freight.
Okay, thank you very much, Kenneth. We have another question by Gia. The question is, can you speak about chambers of commerce between the U.S. and other countries? How can we benefit from their services?
Good question. First, I'm a big fan of chambers of commerce. I'm a member of several of them. In the U.S., where I am, we've got all sorts of chambers of commerce, including, and I'm specifically in Maryland, near Washington, D.C., including binational chambers from just about every country in the world. So I can join if I want to the Salvadoran American Chamber or the British American Chamber or just about any other, and meet other people who do business with that particular country, and meet people from that country who are doing business in the U.S. Now, overseas, the U.S. has what they call AmChams, American Chambers of Commerce, in almost every country. And an AmCham, they're not always, they don't always give you a whole lot of help finding buyers, but often they can give you recommendations as to their members. So if you have someone who you're thinking of selling to, you can see if that person is a member of AmCham. And if it is, that in itself is a good recommendation, and the chamber itself might be able to give you more information about that person. So yes, join at least one chamber in the U.S. and then in some cases get in contact with the American chambers overseas. There are a few places like Colombia, for example, where the Chamber of Commerce in Bogota is a huge organization. Membership by some kinds of businesses is obligatory. And so if you want to know something about almost any business in the country, the Chamber of Commerce of Bogota can give you that information.
Great. Thank you so much, Kenneth. We're running out of time, so I'm going to go with one last question from Jim. If I wanted to export and import from the Dominican Republic, exporting building materials and importing health foods, what issues do you foresee?
Well,
that's a pretty general question.
Jim, buenas tardes. Es una buena pregunta. Good afternoon. That's a good question too. Exporting on the U.S. side, I don't see many issues. You won't need any license for most products, and you will be able to get most products. And shipping is pretty good, except that it almost all goes into Santo Domingo. I don't think there are container ships that go into Puerto Plata or any other port in the Dominican Republic. So that might be your biggest problem. Importing, customs in the Dominican Republic used to be famous for the amount of, how shall I say this, off-the-books income that customs officers earned, but that has changed now, and customs problems in customs are fairly rare. And again, the import restrictions aren't that bad as long as you're exporting products that the Dominican Republic doesn't have already, and you have the DR CAFTA, the trade agreement between the U.S., Dominican Republic, and Caribbean countries and Central American countries. So I don't foresee much of a problem with shipping. On the import side, it's health. You mentioned health food, I think, and I'm not sure what health food the DR has, but the typical Dominican food products come into the U.S. all the time, especially to Miami and second to New York. They come in, they're brought in mostly by members of the National Supermarkets Association, which is a trade association of Dominican grocers headquartered somewhere in Queens. So get in touch with this National Supermarkets Association, and they can probably answer any question you have about importing food products. If not, the export promotion, I think it's called CEDOPEX, or I've forgotten the name of it now, the Trade Promotion Association in the Dominican Republic, can answer other questions for you. So sound like two good business opportunities going and coming, and I hope you're successful.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. That was great. Well, we ran out of time, so I'm going to have to close the presentation. I want to remind you guys, feel free to reach out to Kenneth with any questions, consultations, anything he can help with. The information was provided on screen, or you can go to his Zintro profile, which is profile/Kenneth/Weiss, which you basically have in your chat window. Kenneth, on behalf of Zintro and over 180,000 members, I want to thank you so much for sharing your insights. Guys, this closes today's presentation. I wish you all a very nice day.